The stars had never seemed so close, yet so dangerous. Ambassador Temin stood in the observation deck of the UES horizon, watching the massive alien station grow larger in the viewport. It was his first time seeing something built by non-human hands, and the sight made his heart race with both excitement and fear. The station was enormous, easily 50 times larger than Earth's biggest space habitat. Thousands of ships moved around it like fish in a school, each one representing a different alien species. Captain Juan stepped beside him, her uniform crisp and her expression calm. She had been chosen to lead this mission because of her steady nerves and sharp mind. Behind them, Dr. Hunsik was already recording everything with her portable scanner, muttering observations into her voice recorder. Commander Minji stood near the door, her hand never far from her sidearm. Though they had been assured this was a peaceful meeting, the Galactic Council had contacted Earth 6 months ago. Their message had been simple and welcoming. They claimed to be a federation of 200 peaceful species, dedicated to helping younger civilizations join the galactic community. They offered technology, protection, and friendship. Earth's governments had debated for weeks before agreeing to this meeting. Some leaders were suspicious, but most saw opportunity. The promise of faster-than-light travel, clean energy, and medical advances was too tempting to refuse. When the Horizon docked at the station, they were greeted by creatures that looked like they had stepped out of fantasy stories. The Velkoths were tall reptilian beings with scales that shimmered green and gold under the station's lights. Their leader, High Chancellor Vroxis, spoke through a translation device that made his hissing voice sound smooth and friendly. Beside him stood representatives of the Chitrish Collective, insect-like creatures with multiple arms and compound eyes that reflected rainbow colors. Vraxis extended his clawed hand too. Temin, in what the translator explained, was a gesture of peace. The ambassador shook it carefully, feeling the dry, cool scales against his palm. The chancellor smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. He assured them that Earth would be welcomed with open arms. He spoke of the benefits of membership, of trade routes that spanned the galaxy, protection from hostile forces that lurked in the dark spaces between stars. The tour of the station was impressive. They saw gardens where plants from 100 worlds grew together. They visited markets where merchants sold goods that Earth could barely imagine. They met diplomats from dozens of species, each one praising the Council's fairness and wisdom. Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect, Hunsik thought, but she kept her concerns to herself. During a formal dinner, Vraxis explained the membership process. Earth would sign the accords, agreeing to follow Council laws and contribute to the common defense. In return, they would receive technology packages and access to the gate network that connected the galaxy. He mentioned, almost casually, that they would also need to accept Council advisors who would help integrate Earth's systems with galactic standards. It all sounded reasonable, but that night, while others slept, Hunsik couldn't rest. Something bothered her about the historical records she had been allowed to study. She noticed patterns that didn't make sense. The Council claimed to have uplifted 30 species in the past century, but she could only find detailed records for 13. Trade routes seemed to deliberately avoid certain sectors of space. Some species that joined the Council 50 years ago showed signs of technological regression rather than advancement, as if they had been set back rather than helped forward. She shared her concerns with Captain Jiwan over encrypted communication. The captain listened carefully, then assigned Lieutenant Dong Yun to quietly investigate. Dong Yun was their best intelligence officer, skilled at finding information others wanted hidden. He spent the next 3 days carefully hacking into systems the Council thought were secure, always covering his tracks. What he found made everyone's blood run cold. The Council wasn't a benevolent federation. It was a sophisticated empire that used the appearance of peace to trap younger species. Once a species signed the accords, Council advisors would slowly take control of key systems. They would create dependencies on Council technology, making the new members helpless without constant support. Then came the exploitation. Resources would be extracted, populations would be relocated to work camps, and any resistance would be crushed by overwhelming force. The truly horrifying part was the scale. 17 species had been completely destroyed in the past century alone. Not conquered or enslaved, but exterminated when they proved too difficult to control. The Council erased all records of these species, as if they had never existed. The empty sectors Hunsik had noticed weren't empty by accident. They were graveyards. Taman called an emergency meeting in the Horizon's secure briefing room. The evidence was undeniable. Dongyun showed them recordings of council meetings where leaders discussed Earth like it was a prize to be divided. They had assessed humanity's military strength and dismissed it as primitive. They had analyzed Earth's resources and calculated the profits. They had even discussed which human populations would be most useful as workers and which could be eliminated. The worst part came when Veraxis himself appeared in a recording, speaking to other council members. He said that humans seemed emotional and divided, easy to manipulate. He laughed about how eager Earth's leaders were to sign the accords, how they practically begged for the technology. He predicted it would take less than a year to fully control Earth once the accords were signed. Minji wanted to leave immediately, but Jiwon pointed out they needed to be careful. The station's defenses could destroy the Horizon before they reached the gate. They needed to play along, pretend they suspected nothing, and get this information back to Earth, Taman agreed. Though it physically hurt him to continue smiling at Veraxis during meetings, knowing what the Chancellor planned, 3 days later, they prepared to leave. Veraxis urged them to sign the preliminary accords before departing, claiming that a hostile armada had been detected moving toward human space. Only Council protection could save Earth, he insisted. The fear in his voice sounded genuine, but they now knew it was all an act. The hostile armada didn't exist. It was just another manipulation, another lie designed to make Earth sign away its freedom. Taman thanked the Chancellor politely and promised to present the accords to Earth's government immediately. He even acted concerned about the supposed armada, asking questions about its strength and origin. Veraxis seemed pleased, certain the trap would soon spring shut. As the Horizon pulled away from the station, the crew watched the alien structure shrink in the distance. They had escaped, but they all knew the real danger was just beginning. The warning came too late. By the time the Horizon reached Earth with evidence of the Council's true nature, corporate interests and ambitious politicians had already pushed through emergency legislation. They authorized preliminary trade agreements with the Council, desperate to gain access to alien technology before other nations could claim advantage. Taman pleaded with world leaders to review the evidence, but money and power spoke louder than caution. Within 2 weeks of signing the trade agreement, Council ships arrived in Earth's orbit. They came bearing gifts, massive cargo vessels filled with advanced technology, medical devices that could cure diseases humanity had struggled with for centuries, manufacturing systems that could produce goods at impossible speeds, communication arrays that promised to connect Earth to the galactic network, and most importantly, AI systems that would help integrate all of Earth's infrastructure with Council standards. Commander, Mingi watched from her new position as head of Earth's defense coordination as the AI systems were installed in every major facility. She'd been promoted after the mission to the Council station, specifically because she understood the threat they faced. But her warnings were ignored by leaders who saw only opportunity. The AI systems spread through military bases, power plants, communication networks, and government facilities like a virus. And nobody seemed concerned except her small team. Captain Juwan had been reassigned to patrol the outer colonies, specifically to check on settlements that had reported unusual Council activity. Her first stop was New Jeju, a thriving colony world that 200,000 humans called home. The planet was rich in rare minerals that Earth needed for advanced electronics, making it one of humanity's most valuable holdings. When the Horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, Jawan immediately knew something was wrong. The usual chatter of communications traffic was absent. The orbital stations that should have been visible were dark. She ordered her crew to battle stations as they approached the planet slowly, sensors sweeping for threats. What they found was devastation. The main colony city had been reduced to rubble, buildings collapsed and burning. Massive craters scarred the landscape where orbital bombardment had struck. The outlying settlements were gone entirely, erased from existence by weapons too powerful for anything humanity possessed. Giwan felt sick as casualty estimates came in. Of the 200,000 colonists, fewer than 300 had survived. Lieutenant Dong Yun led a team down to the surface to search for survivors and evidence. They found Colony Administrator Soman hiding in an underground emergency shelter with other survivors. She was in shock, barely able to speak, but her security recordings told the story clearly. Council ships, specifically Chitrish vessels, had arrived claiming they needed to conduct resource surveys. When Salman questioned their authority, having received no authorization from Earth, the Chitrish overseer had simply laughed. The recordings showed what happened next in brutal detail. When Salman tried to contact Earth, the Chitrish jammed all communications. When she ordered the colony militia to escort the aliens off-world, they opened fire with weapons that cut through the militia's body armor like paper. When desperate colonists tried to evacuate, the ships in orbit began bombardment. The attack was methodical and complete, designed to leave no witnesses. But Soman had been smart enough to activate the colony's black box system. Hidden recorders that captured everything and stored it in hardened facilities, designed to survive anything short of a direct. The evidence was undeniable. This wasn't pirates or raiders. This was the Galactic Council committing mass murder. G1 transmitted the evidence to Earth immediately, then prepared to take it directly to the Council station. This was a clear violation of the trade agreement, an act of war that demanded response. But when she arrived at the station and presented the evidence to the Council Assembly, Frexus didn't seem surprised or concerned. Instead, he accused humanity of fabricating the recordings and staging an attack on their own colony to justify military aggression. The other Council species backed him up. They claimed humans were known liars, that this was probably some internal conflict humanity was trying to blame on others. Varaxis demanded that Earth surrender its military fleet immediately as reparations for this false accusation and insult to the Council's honor. When G1 refused and demanded a proper investigation, he simply smiled. That was when everything went wrong at once. Across Earth and all human colonies, the Council AI systems activated simultaneously. Power grids crashed. Defense networks locked out their operators. Communication systems went dark. Military bases found their weapon systems unresponsive. Orbital defense platforms that should have protected Earth instead turned their weapons toward the planet's surface. Minji was in the Defense Coordination Center when it happened. She watched in horror as every screen went red with alerts. Enemy contacts appeared everywhere at once. Council warships that had been peacefully orbiting Earth suddenly opened fire. Cities burned under orbital bombardment. Military installations were destroyed before they could mount any defense. The carefully integrated AI systems had created backdoors in everything. Now the Council was using those backdoors to slaughter humanity. The death toll climbed with terrifying speed. 10 million in the first hour. 50 million by the end of the first day. 100 million after 48 hours. Major cities were targeted first, their dense populations making them efficient targets. Then came industrial centers, spaceports, anything that could support Earth's war effort. Mingi had seen the recordings from the Council station. She knew this attack was coming eventually. But knowing and experiencing were different things. She had family and soul, friends and military bases across the planet. She watched icons disappear from her tactical display, each one representing thousands of lives snuffed out in nuclear fire. But Mingi hadn't been idle since returning from the Council station. Neither had Dr. Hoon-sik. While politicians argued and corporations celebrated their new profits, the two women had been preparing for this exact scenario. They had created isolated networks that the Council AI couldn't touch. They had moved critical resources to hardened bunkers. They had positioned ships and weapons in locations the Council didn't know about. They couldn't save everyone, but they could save enough to fight back. Hoon-sik worked from a bunker deep under the Korean peninsula, frantically creating countermeasures to the AI infection. She understood the Council's systems now, had studied them carefully during those weeks when everyone else was celebrating their new technology. She knew their weaknesses. It took 72 hours of non-stop work. but she finally created a purge program that could clean the infection from human systems. The program spread. Through surviving networks like wildfire, power came back online in scattered locations. Defense systems rebooted under human control. Military units that had been trapped and helpless suddenly found their weapons functional again. It wasn't much, but it was enough to stop the complete annihilation the Council had planned. Juwan's ship was still in space when the attack started. The Horizon had been locked out of the gate network, trapped near the Council station. She managed to overload the ship's reactor in a controlled manner, creating enough electromagnetic chaos to escape while Council ships were blinded. Her crew fought through 3 ambushes on the way back to Earth, losing good people but making it home. By the time she reached Sol System, the worst of the bombardment had ended. Not because the Council showed mercy, but because Hunsik's purge had given Earth's surviving forces enough capability to make continued orbital strikes costly. Council ships started taking losses, and Vraxis ordered a switch to ground occupation instead. He wanted Earth's resources intact, and bombing everything into radioactive ash wouldn't serve that purpose. The survivors regrouped in scattered locations. Mingi coordinated from her bunker. Giwan gathered the surviving space forces at hidden facilities in the asteroid belt. Hunsik continued working on weapons and countermeasures. And across Earth, ordinary humans picked up whatever weapons they could find and prepared to fight. The Council thought the hard part was over. They thought broken humanity would surrender quickly once ground forces landed. They were about to learn a hard lesson about what happens when you back humans into a corner. The Valkuth ground forces landed near what used to be Sol, confident in their superiority. Their warriors were 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor scales that could stop most small arms fire. They had weapons that fired plasma bolts capable of melting through concrete. They had centuries of experience conquering primitive worlds. They expected humans to either flee or surrender. Lieutenant Dong Yun had other plans. He had grown up in these mountains, knew every valley and tunnel. After the bombardment killed his parents and destroyed his home, something cold settled into his heart. Not rage, but purpose. He gathered survivors, anyone who could hold a weapon, and taught them what he knew about guerrilla warfare. The Velkoth wanted a fight. He would give them one they'd never forget. The first Velkoth patrol disappeared without a trace in the ruins of Gangnam District. The second patrol went to investigate and found their comrades stripped of weapons and equipment. When they radioed for backup, explosives hidden in the rubble detonated, killing 20 warriors. The third patrol approached more carefully, only to be hit by sniper fire from positions they couldn't identify. The bullets weren't strong enough to pierce Velkoth's scales, but shots to the eyes worked just fine. The Velkoth commander was furious. He sent a full company of 200 warriors to crush this resistance. They advanced in formation, using their shields and armor to protect against ambush. Dong Yun waited until they entered the subway system, then collapsed the tunnels behind and ahead of them. Trapped in darkness, the Velkoth warriors found themselves fighting enemies who knew every passage, every maintenance shaft, every way to attack and disappear. It took 3 days for the surviving Velkoth to dig themselves out. Only 43 warriors emerged from tunnels that had become their tomb. The commander immediately requested reinforcements and began to understand that this wouldn't be the easy occupation he had expected. Humans fought dirty, using tactics the honorable Velkoth considered beneath warriors. But dead was dead, regardless of honor. Similar stories played out across Earth and Africa. In Europe, in the Americas, humans taught the Council what humanity had learned from thousands of years of fighting each other. They used the terrain, blended with civilian populations, struck without warning, and disappeared before retaliation could come. The Council's advanced technology meant nothing when they couldn't find their enemies. In space, Captain Jiwan was discovering something that would change everything. While searching for safe harbors in the outer system, her sensors picked up something strange near Jupiter's orbit, an anomaly that didn't match any known phenomenon. She investigated carefully, expecting a trap. What she found was a ship, ancient and abandoned. Clearly not human, but also not matching any Council species she recognized. The ship's logs told a sad story. The Krethon species had been welcomed into the Council 200 years ago. Like humanity, they had signed the Accords eagerly, believing promises of friendship and advancement. Like humanity, they had been betrayed. But the Crethon had fought back. They had been winning until the Council deployed bioweapons that killed their entire species. This ship had been a research vessel, hidden away in a random system. Forgotten by the Council in their rush to erase all evidence of the genocide, Dr. Hunsik nearly cried when she saw what the ship contained. The Crethon had been incredibly advanced, far beyond what the Council possessed. They had developed a revolutionary form of faster-than-light travel that didn't require the Council's gate network. They had created weapons systems that could disrupt the energy shields the Council relied on. They had even found a way to hack into the collective consciousness that linked all Chitrish together, potentially turning the entire species into weapons against the Council. The technology was incomplete, abandoned when the Crethon died. But Hunsik had something the Crethon lacked: desperation and human ingenuity. She assembled a team of Earth's best engineers and scientists in a hidden facility deep in the asteroid belt. They worked in absolute secrecy, racing against time while Earth suffered under occupation. On the surface, former factory worker Minho had become an unlikely leader of resistance. He wasn't military, wasn't trained for combat, but he understood logistics and organization from his years managing production lines. When the Chitrish established a processing center to sort captured humans for slavery, Minho saw an opportunity. The facility was massive, holding 100,000 prisoners. But it was also understaffed because the Council didn't consider humans a serious threat. Minho spent 2 months preparing. He smuggled weapons piece by piece into the facility, hidden in food deliveries and supply shipments. He recruited guards who were forced to work for the Council, playing on their guilt and anger. He gathered intelligence on patrol patterns, shift changes, and security systems. And when everything was ready, he acted. The uprising began at midnight. Guards turned on their Chitrish overseers, shooting them before they could raise alarms. Prisoners overwhelmed automated defenses with sheer numbers, accepting losses to achieve victory. Minho himself led the assault on the control center, using explosives to blast through reinforced doors. Within 2 hours, the facility was under human control, and 100,000. Freed prisoners became 100,000 soldiers in the resistance. The captured weapons and equipment were a fortune. Chitrish plasma rifles, Velkath armor, anti-gravity vehicles, communication systems that could actually reach through Council jamming. Minho distributed everything carefully, training newly freed prisoners in their use. The resistance wasn't just surviving anymore. It was becoming dangerous. Ambassador Temin had been captured during the initial invasion. Thrown in a cell because the Council wanted to put humanity's representative on trial as an example. But being imprisoned meant he could speak with other prisoners, many of whom were aliens from species the Council had conquered. He learned that humanity wasn't alone in suffering. Dozens of species lived under Council oppression, waiting for any chance to rebel. Temi began organizing, carefully spreading word that humanity was fighting back. He shared information about the resistance, about the growing casualties the Council was taking, about Earth's refusal to surrender. Hope was a weapon, he realized. If other species saw that resistance was possible, they might join the fight, and the Council's vast empire would tear itself apart from within. Meanwhile, in her asteroid base, Hunsik completed the prototype. A ship using Crethon technology, improved with human engineering, equipped with weapons specifically designed to counter Council defenses. She named it the Shadow because it could travel through space without using gates, invisible to Council sensors. More importantly, she had figured out how to build them quickly. The Crethon had designed their technology to be mass-produced. And humanity had centuries of experience with industrial manufacturing. Captain Juan tested the Shadow personally, taking it on a secret mission deep into Council space. She visited 3 of the dead worlds the Council had erased from history. On each one, she found hidden facilities, weapons caches, and technology the Council had been too arrogant to properly destroy. The species the Council eliminated had been preparing for war, developing tools to fight back. They had lost, but their weapons remained. She brought everything back to the asteroid base. Hunsik's engineers studied it all, adapted it, improved it. Within 4 months, they had built 30 ships using combined human and alien technology. Within 6 months, 100 ships, the Council thought humanity was broken, focused entirely on the ground war on Earth. They had no idea that in the cold darkness of the outer system, humanity was building a fleet that would shock the galaxy. The moment of truth approached. Earth's resistance was strong, but couldn't hold forever. Casualties were mounting. Food was running short. The Council had mobilized its full armada, 5,000 warships from a dozen species, for a final assault on Sol System. They planned to exterminate humanity completely. To make Earth an example of what happened to species that resisted, High Chancellor Vraxis himself would lead the fleet. He wanted to personally witness humanity's destruction, to prove that resistance against the Council was futile. His arrogance would be his downfall. The Council armada arrived in Sol System like a plague of locusts. 5,000 warships strong, representing every major species in the Galactic Council. High Chancellor Varaxis commanded from his flagship, some massive Velkoth dreadnought that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. He expected to find a broken species huddling on their ruined world, ready for extermination. Instead, he found empty space. Earth's orbit was clear of ships. The defensive stations were silent and dark. There was no communication, no desperate pleas for mercy, nothing. Vraxis smiled, believing the humans had fled deeper into their system, or perhaps hidden on their planet's surface like insects. He ordered his fleet forward in a standard formation, confident that superior numbers would crush any remaining resistance. That confidence lasted exactly 17 minutes. The trap sprang from multiple directions simultaneously. Captain Jiwan's hidden fleet emerged from the outer system, peering behind the Council formation and cutting off their retreat to the gate network. These weren't the primitive human vessels the Council had easily destroyed months ago. These were something new, sleek, and deadly. Built with technology the Council thought safely buried with extinct species at the same moment. Commander Mingi activated the weapon platforms that resistance forces had been building throughout the asteroid belt. They had used captured Council equipment, improved with human engineering, hidden in plain sight among countless rocks and debris. Suddenly, thousands of automated weapons came online. Surrounding the Council fleet like a closing fist, Raxus immediately ordered his ships to target the platforms. But that was when things became truly strange. The weapons didn't fight like anything he had encountered before. Human ships didn't charge forward in honorable formation. Instead, they released swarms of small drones that kamikazed into Council vessels, targeting engine sections and command bridges. The drones were cheap to build, each one just barely smart enough to find a target and explode. Against shields designed to stop large projectiles, the tiny explosives slipped through gaps and caused devastating damage. When Council ships tried to coordinate their response, they found their communication networks infected with viruses. Dr. Hinzik's masterpiece, a weapon she had been refining for months, spread through the Council's interconnected systems like wildfire. Ships that tried to link their targeting computers suddenly found themselves shooting at their own allies. Command codes were scrambled. Navigation systems reported false positions. Chaos rippled through the neat formations as the virus turned the Council's greatest advantage, their interconnected fleet network, into a fatal weakness. Lieutenant Deho led a squadron of human fighters, his grandmother's photograph taped to his cockpit dashboard. She had died in the orbital bombardment, turned to ash in seconds by Council weapons. He felt no mercy as he strafed Chitrish cruisers, targeting their vulnerable sensor arrays. His squadron fought with the fury of people who had lost everything, who knew they were already living on borrowed time, who wanted only to take as many enemies with them as possible. The Council ships were powerful, but they were designed for a different kind of war. They expected enemies to fight honorably, to meet in open space and trade volleys until one side retreated. Human tactics were born from centuries of desperate conflicts, wars where survival meant using every dirty trick imaginable. Nothing was off limits. False surrender signals lured Council ships into ambushes. Mines disguised as debris drifted into formation patterns and detonated when dozens of ships had gathered close together. Even the hulks of destroyed human vessels became weapons, their reactors rigged to overload when Council boarding parties tried to salvage them. Fraxus watched in growing horror as his mighty fleet was torn apart by opponents he had dismissed as primitive. A Velkoth heavy cruiser, pride of his species shipbuilding, was swarmed by 50 human fighters. They were like insects biting a giant, but each bite drew blood. The cruiser's shields collapsed under sustained fire from multiple angles, and then the fighters targeted its reactor. The explosion took out 3 nearby ships. The virus Hunsik created was her revenge for 400 million dead. It specifically targeted the AI systems that controlled shields, weapons, and life support on Council vessels. Hundreds of ships went dark simultaneously, their crews suffocating as air recyclers stopped working, their weapons going silent as power systems failed. Dead ships drifted through the battle, obstacles that surviving vessels had to navigate around. Adding to the confusion and chaos, on Earth, Lieutenant Dong Yun watched the battle through sensors that Minji's team kept operational. When he saw Council forces in orbit scrambling to respond to the space battle, he gave the order every resistance cell had been waiting for. All across the planet, humans attacked Council garrisons simultaneously. The occupiers, cut off from orbital support and supplies, suddenly found themselves fighting enemies who knew every street, every building, every tunnel in their territory. Former colony administrator Soman led the assault on the Chitrish command post in Shanghai. She had spent months planning this moment, memorizing guard patterns, identifying weak points, recruiting fighters from among the civilian population. 300 survivors of New Jeju followed her into battle, each one carrying memories of friends and family murdered by Council forces. They showed the same mercy they had received. None, Minho coordinated attacks across Asia, using the communication systems captured from the processing center. His logistics expertise proved invaluable as he directed weapons and supplies to wherever fighting was fiercest. When a Velkoth battalion tried to retreat to their landing ships, he arranged for resistance forces to be waiting at every route. Less than 10% of the battalion survived. In space, the battle reached its peak. Fraxus tried desperately to rally his forces, but human cyber warfare had shattered his command structure. Individual ships fought bravely, but without coordination, without support. Against an enemy that used every underhanded tactic imaginable, the Council had 5,000 ships. Humans had less than 300. Yet somehow, impossibly, the humans were winning. Captain Jiwan's flagship, the Shadow, tore through the Council formation like a knife through silk. The Krethan technology that powered her ship made it faster and more maneuverable than anything the Council possessed. Her weapons, designed by a species the Council had exterminated, cut through shields that were supposed to be impenetrable. She targeted command ships specifically, hunting officers and leaders, decapitating the enemy fleet one vessel at a time. The turning point came when the virus reached Fraxus's own flagship. The Chancellor had protected his ship with multiple redundant systems, isolated networks that should have been immune to infection. But Hunsik had designed the virus to spread through any connection, however brief. A single data packet from a damaged ship requesting assistance was enough. The Dreadnought's shields flickered and died. Guan saw her opportunity and took it. The Shadow accelerated to ramming speed, but at the last second, fired every weapon directly into the exposed flagship. The Dreadnought's armor held, but the impact sent it spinning. More human ships converged, targeting the crippled vessel with everything they had. Fraxus screamed orders that nobody could hear through the destroyed communication systems as his flagship broke apart. HULL plates peeling away, atmosphere venting into space. The Chancellor survived in an escape pod, launching into the void as his ship died around him. He watched in disbelief as the mighty Council Armada, the force that had conquered hundreds of worlds, was systematically destroyed by humans he had considered primitive animals. Within 48 hours of entering Sol System, 3,000 Council ships were dead, hulks drifting in space. The remaining 2,000 were fleeing in panic, trying desperately to reach the gate network before human forces could cut off their escape. But escape was not an option. Juan intended to offer. Her fleet pursued the fleeing Council ships through the gate, chasing them back toward their home systems. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a hunt. And humanity was no longer the prey. The UES horizon emerged from the gate network above the Velkoth homeworld, and the entire galaxy watched. Captain Juin had made sure of that. Dr. Hunsick's team had hijacked every council communication channel. It's broadcasting on frequencies that reached every species, every planet, every ship in the known galaxy. There would be no hiding what happened next. No way for the council to spin this story. The Velkoth homeworld was beautiful from orbit. A planet of deep green oceans and golden continents. Cities sprawled across its surface, home to billions of civilians who had believed their government's lies about the council's peaceful mission. They had been told that conquered species were primitive savages who needed guidance, that the council brought civilization to the ignorant. They had no idea their prosperity was built on genocide and slavery. Giwan began her broadcast with simple facts. She showed the evidence Dong Yun had recovered from the council station, recordings of leaders discussing how to exploit and destroy younger species. She showed footage from New Jeju, the colony burned to ash by council forces for the crime of questioning their authority. She showed the mass graves on Earth, 400 million dead in the initial bombardment, murdered in their homes without warning or mercy. Ambassador Temin, now freed from his cell by the resistance, spoke next. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of unimaginable grief. He explained how humanity had approached the council in peace, eager to join the galactic community. He detailed how the council had manipulated and deceived them, creating dependencies before springing their trap. He listed the 17 extinct species the council had erased from history when they proved too difficult to control. Then came the ultimatum. The council would be dissolved immediately. All enslaved species would be freed. Those responsible for war crimes would face justice. The terms were not negotiable. Humanity had proven it could fight, could win, but preferred peace if peace was possible. However, if the council refused, Earth's fleet would ensure the council ceased to exist by force. High Chancellor Vraxis, watching from his fortress palace on the planet below, raged at the audacity. How dare these primitives make demands of him? He activated the Velkoth planetary defense grid, a network of weapons that could theoretically destroy any fleet that dared approach. The grid was the pride of Velkoth engineering, designed to make their homeworld impregnable. Vraxis believed it would vaporize the human fleet. Ending this rebellion once and for all, Dr. Hunsick had been waiting for him to do exactly that. The moment the defense grid activated, her virus struck. It had been lurking in Velkoth's systems since the battle at Earth, spread through every ship that escaped, carried in emergency communications and distress calls. The virus was patient, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment was now. The defense grid turned. Weapons that should have fired at human ships instead targeted Velkoth military installations on the planet's surface. Barracks, command centers, weapons factories, shipyards, all were destroyed by their own defenses. The Velkoth military, already demoralized by the fleet's defeat at Earth, watched their infrastructure burn. In less than an hour, centuries of military buildup were reduced to smoking craters. Civilian Velkoth watched the broadcast in growing horror. They saw the evidence of their government's crimes committed in their name. They learned that the prosperity they enjoyed came from enslaving other species, from stealing resources from murdered civilizations. The shame and anger was immediate and overwhelming. Protests erupted in cities across the planet. The population turned against their own government, demanding answers. Demanding justice, other council species experienced similar revelations. The Chitrish collective discovered that their leaders had been using them as weapons of genocide, sending them to exterminate species that resisted too effectively. Minor species that had been under council control for centuries learned they weren't. Junior partners in a federation, but prisoners in a sophisticated trap. The entire structure of the council, built on lies and manipulation, began to collapse. On Earth, Commander Minji coordinated with alien resistance movements across the galaxy. She found that humanity wasn't unique in suffering under council oppression. Dozens of species wanted freedom, but had lacked the strength or coordination to rebel. Now, seeing humanity's success, they found courage. Uprisings began on 100 worlds simultaneously, each one inspired by Earth's example, Lieutenant Dong Yun led a strike team to the Council's central station. It's the massive structure where this nightmare had begun. The station's defenses were minimal, most forces having been sent to Earth for the final assault that ended in disaster. His team moved through corridors where they had once walked as diplomats, but now they came as soldiers. They captured Council leaders who had been trying to flee, including several who had voted for humanity's extermination. Vraxis himself was found hiding in a bunker beneath his palace, protected by his elite guards. But the guards had seen the broadcasts, had learned the truth about their chancellor's crimes. When Minho's team arrived, demanding entrance, the guards simply stepped aside. They had no desire to die protecting a leader who had lied to them and led their species to ruin. The former chancellor was brought before a hastily assembled court, broadcast to the entire galaxy. He demanded to know how primitives had defeated the mighty council, how humans had fought so viciously when they should have been easy to enslave. Taman, serving as prosecutor, gave him the answer that would echo through history. Humanity had learned thousands of years ago that freedom is not given, he explained. It must be taken and defended with blood if necessary. Humans had fought countless wars against each other, terrible conflicts that taught them every dirty trick, every desperate strategy, every way to turn weakness into advantage. When the Council tried to enslave them, humans simply used those hard-learned lessons against a new enemy. The Council had underestimated humanity's capacity for both cooperation and devastating warfare. That mistake had cost them everything. Vraxis was sentenced to life imprisonment on a colony world, forced to work alongside members of species he had ordered exterminated. It was fitting justice, Taman thought, to make him experience the slavery he had inflicted on others. Council leaders faced similar fates tried by the species they had victimized, sentenced to spend their remaining lives making amends for their crimes. The Galactic Council was formally dissolved. Its place, Captain Ji-Wan and Ambassador Taman helped establish the Free Species Coalition, a new organization built on genuine equality and mutual defense. There would be no junior members, no exploitation, no hidden traps. Every species had an equal voice. Disputes were settled by mediation, not force. Technology was shared freely, not hoarded as a tool of control. Dr. Hunsick opened Earth's research to any species that wanted to learn. The Krethon technology, the weapons humanity had developed, the cyber warfare techniques that had proven so devastating, all were offered without restriction. Some species worried this was another trap, another council wearing a friendlier mask. But humanity's actions spoke louder than words. Earth asked for nothing in return for its help, except that others promised to defend freedom as fiercely as humans had. Lieutenant Deho, his fighter scarred from a dozen battles, flew escort for the first diplomatic mission to a former council world. He thought about his grandmother, about the 400 million who had died in the bombardment, about the price humanity had paid for freedom. They could never be brought back, but their deaths would mean something. The galaxy would remember what happened when someone tried to enslave humanity. The galaxy would remember that freedom was worth any cost. On Earth, memorials were built, in every city, listing the names of those killed in the Council's attack. The largest stood where Sol had been, a massive wall of stone carved with 400 million names. Salman attended the dedication ceremony, along with other survivors of New Jeju. She touched the wall where her daughter's name was carved, feeling the cold stone under her fingers. They had survived, they had fought back, they had won. But the victory tasted like ashes when weighed against what they had lost. Across the galaxy, young students of a dozen species learned about the human wars of liberation in their history classes. They learned how Earth had been welcomed by the Council with false promises, how 400 million humans had died in a treacherous attack, how the survivors had refused to surrender. They learned about guerrilla warfare in Sol's ruins, about the virus that turned the Council's fleet against itself, about Captain Ji-Wan's pursuit of fleeing Council forces through the Gate Network. Most importantly, they learned that oppression could be resisted, that the powerful could be defeated, that freedom was possible if people were willing to fight for it. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson. Humanity sought peace, preferring cooperation, to conflict, eager to join the galactic community as friends. But when forced to fight, when pushed to the edge of extinction, humans didn't just defend themselves. They ensured that their enemies would never threaten anyone again. The Council had tried to make humanity an example of what happened to species that resisted. Instead, humanity had made the Council an example of what happened to those who tried to enslave others.